Hello and welcome to my channel. Today I'm doing a sort of historical informative piece on the history of office furniture. Quickly, my background, I have a BFA, which is a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Interior Design. I have been working in office furniture as a designer for the past 9 years. I did 1 year at an Allsteel dealer. It was an internship that turned into like a very minimal part-time position. And then I spent the next 8 years at a Steelcase dealer. I have a huge love for office furniture. Let's just jump into it. Before the 19th century, most jobs were labor related, so farming, and there wasn't a need for an office chair. An office chair was only for the wealthy or government officials or academics. Then came the Industrial Revolution and more people were needed for logistical reasons, bookkeeping, etc. And therefore a need for more white-collar workers arose. As white-collar worker needs began to arise, bosses realized it was important to make these people comfortable. Thus, the office chair. Charles Darwin is actually supposedly the first to kind of create an office chair. He attached wheels onto a regular chair in the 1840s so that he could toggle between specimens. Then in the 1850s came the Centripetal office chair mass production. It was designed by Thomas Warren. It was launched by the American Chair Company in 1851 at the Great Exhibition in London. It now sits in the Brooklyn Museum. This chair, though it looks dated, was surprisingly functional by today's standards. It was made of cast iron and upholstered in velvet. However, as new technology began to emerge, like the typewriter and the telephone, the Taylorist approach became more prominent. The focus was maximizing efficiency and output. So this created just long rows of desks and chairs, one after the next, in an open plan. This provided very little space, which in turn was very uncomfortable for all of the workers because well-being was not an important focus at that time. It wasn't until the skyscraper started to become popular or emerged where a lot of companies became part of one building, and therefore the rise of typists and administrative workers became the necessity that offices began to focus on the open plan. It was a mix of open plan for those kind of workers and private offices, but there was an emergence of kitchens, which seems obvious now, but back then it was a huge luxury for office workers. As the Industrial Revolution culminated, the growth of the office worker took notice. The most popular attraction during the 1876 Centennial Exhibition in Philadelphia was the office furniture exhibit. Meanwhile, specialty chairs for dentists and barbers began to emerge, and it started to introduce all of the components that make our office furniture chairs today. Now we're getting into the 1890s. We have to acknowledge the dynamic curving Art Nouveau desk by Henry Vanderbilt. It launched in 1899, and today it is still considered a classic design. Now we're into the 1900s. So in the 1900s, think of Frank Lloyd Wright, and you know his iconic style. So he had designed an office building called the Larkin Building in 1904. He created a chair specifically to match the design of this building. It was known for its innovative height adjustable mechanism. However, it lacked the human-centered design features that we take for granted today. Although the Victorian era had faded, the assumption of bosses were that comfort equaled laziness. So all of the products that were chosen for these offices at that time, they were centered around cost and also whatever visually matched the style, the architecture that was prevalent at that time. So using the Larkin Building as an example, the steel girder was huge in the rise of the open office concept. This revolutionary construction allowed for bigger spaces. The earliest offices were straight, linear, and heavily influenced by the manufacturing industry at the time. Frederick Taylor was the first person to be credited with creating the first open office concept. And this idea became hugely popular. All of the administrative workers on one floor together in an open office concept, and then having the private office managers on the second floor that were able to look over at the office workers and obviously just make sure that they're getting their work done. So now we're into the 1920s, and this is just an interesting product that came out. It is called the Victor. It was created by the Metal Office Furniture Company, which is now known as Steelcase. Due to the low manufacturing costs realized by P.M. Wedge, I think, Wedge, who was the founder of the Metal Office Furniture Company, aka Steelcase, he realized that he could use this feature to bend steel at right angles and create a wastebasket. It was a fireproof wastebasket. It seems obvious now, but at the time, because there was a lot of smoking in the office, a fireproof wastebasket was very important. This was a huge gain by that company, and it made them a ton of money. There was a lot of advertising that went into this as well. Now that we're into the 1930s, there was now a desire for both attractive furniture and functional furniture, which there really wasn't before. Private offices started to be just more elegant, but they also needed to feature an area within the office that people could come and meet, whether it be customers or other employees for a meeting. At this time, there was a need for space to include a telephone and filing, as well as a typewriter. Take a look at this invention of Marcel Brewer's steel tubular desk design, which is even relevant by today's standards. The 1930s developed the Johnson Wax Building in Racine in 1939. It was also designed by Frank Lloyd Wright, of course, one of America's greatest architects, if not the greatest. Now we're deciding, okay, we need practical furniture, but we need it to fit the style of the building or the layout of the building. This is where the design features arise. The space planning aspect, the interior design aspect of offices starts to really come into play. It wasn't really until the 1940s that interior designers started to realize the impact of the furniture and the layout that went into these spaces. One of the pioneers of this idea was George Nelson, who was a designer for Herman Miller. He realized that there was a huge market to specifically devote to office furnishings, which people really needed, and needed experts to help them design their spaces. He created what is called a home office desk, shown here below. It was launched in 1947, and it is considered the first modern workstation. And now that we're into the 1950s, seating really became the focus, and what do we need to do to accommodate the needs of these workers. There was a focus on lumbar support that wasn't there before. Products started to emerge like the rosewood swivel chair and the now super iconic Eems lounge chair. The Eems lounge chair and ottoman were made from molded plywood and leather. They were designed by Charles and Ray Eems for Herman Miller. And there's my dog. It had been in design development for a long time, so it wasn't just shoved out there like a lot of products. There was a lot of research that went into the design of this furniture. It was also the first product that Charles and Ray Eems had designed for a high-end market. Examples of these furniture pieces are available to see in New York's Museum of Modern Art. So this is where the invention of the Action Office by Robert Pross came about in 1964. The goal was to provide staff with the ability to do a range of tasks. This led directly into the invention or the inception of modular office furniture. Okay, so getting into the 70s, there's a huge focus on color. The aesthetics are very much more prevalent than they were in the past. Of course, the 60s, kind of think of Mad Men, it started to emerge then, but it really blew up in the 70s with tons of color, as you can imagine, as everything else in the 70s. A lot of times you hear in design pops of color, but the 70s were like explosions of color. The color was on the lamps, the color was on the toilet seats, the color was on the toilets themselves. They were on all of the fabrics. There were mixing, matching, tons of different patterns. Also in the 1970s, there was a focus on the ergonomic task chair. So several catalysts were to blame for the need for this kind of chair. One in particular was Human Scale by Niels Diffrient. This popularized the ergonomic findings of the military and industrial researchers and made them accessible to the design community at large. An American surgeon started spreading the word about a mystery of inflicting workers, now called carpal tunnel syndrome. In 1970, President Nixon signed the Occupational Safety and Health Administration Act into law, which ensured that companies which failed to provide a safe work environment would be penalized. These factors culminated in the ergon chair birth. This was designed by William Stumpf and it was released in 1976. Although it lacked the configurability as the modern office chair, it included foam that molded to our natural seating positions, which was a huge landmark in ergonomic design. Later designs, such as the Aeron chair, used these principles and carried them into the future of different task chair designs. Now we are into the 1980s, and that action office that we talked about before is coming back. It's now re-emerged and called the Action Office 2. However, it kind of grew into, it absolutely grew into what we now know as the dreaded cube farm, but that was not the intention. Robert Frost himself was horrified by these cube farms that later emerged that were inspired by his original design, and I would like to say his quote now. "Not all organizations are intelligent and progressive. Lots are run by crass people who can take the same kind of equipment and create hellholes. They make little bitty cubicles and stuff people in them, barren rat hole places." True. Companies used the idea, but they totally missed the boat in terms of his original intent for the design. The idea then was to just cram as many people you can into one space, regardless of how comfortable it was. So we're kind of back to the in efficiency and output being the main driver for companies. So I found this very interesting. Something else drove the rise for cubicles: the tax code. In the 1960s, it became easier to write off assets like furniture that depreciated over time. Office furniture no longer needed to last a lifetime, and that's why you if you're in the office furniture industry, you know that some of the products that people bought years ago, it's just like a tank. It'll take any kind of beating. It's not the same quality as we have today. At this point, it became much easier for companies to buy Action Office 2 knockoff than to invest in legitimate products. In the 1990s, a wave of different competitors began to emerge, kind of creating the same types of product, and of course, in turn, becoming more competitive of an industry. While specs and aesthetics maybe were different, most adapted to this cube farm idea. If you haven't seen the movie Office Space, it provides a great depiction of what this kind of office cube farm culture was like. The dot-com movement in the 90s coincided with the arrival of more laid-back offices. You think of the 90s as being more neutral. We started to get more kind of not as big as the 70s, but just like easing back into the idea of visuals in the workplace. Speaking of the Aeron chair from before, this is where the Aeron chair grew and started and became well known for its lightweight foam molding textiles and for its lumbar support. There were also monitor arms introduced at this time. Also, sofas and comfortable seating started to emerge for the regular office workers, which before were usually seen only in private offices. This meant there was more breakout areas. The breakout areas would be more collaborative areas meant for different departments to collaborate and kind of connect and work together in a comfortable setting that was kind of like reminiscent of a home living room. So now we're moving into the 2000s. So the 2000s brought up Wi-Fi and lightweight laptops. This meant that cable management systems weren't quite as important as they were in years prior. This also meant that workers were not tethered to their desks, so they could take their lightweight laptops and work anywhere within the building. And this became huge for space planning, because it wasn't like workers were only working in their one little space. They were able to move to different parts of a building and work with other people by themselves. So this created a need for different types of places for people to go that provided, oh, we need a place for 2 people or 4 people or 1 person. And it totally transformed the design of the office spaces. So what else emerged in the 2000s were benching, straight surfaces where you could see over, kind of like think of a large dining table. Also, the reception area was more dedicated now because they wanted to make a huge impact in offices for their customers. You want to make sure that their first impression is a good one. Visually, they're intrigued and they feel comfortable sitting and waiting for their meeting to start. Hi, Editing Brittany here. I just want to point out that the Knoll Barcelona chair was designed in 1929. It was not designed in the 2000s. I was just showing a nice looking reception area with that chair. In the 2010s, it was sort of before and after, but that's when the Silicon Valley offices emerged. Google's had these hugely popular office spaces, and you know, Facebook, etc. A lot of different types of companies wanted to mimic, even on a smaller scale, these kinds of offices. These offices were so fantastical. They had a lot of biophilia. They had a lot of different snack areas and gaming areas. And as I'm showing in this visual, like a slide, just like what you think of when you think of like the movie Big, what he wanted as a child grown into an adult kind of space. It's just like a super fun environment where it doesn't feel like work. Now we're into 2020. Actually, it's 2022, but 2020 is where I'm gonna log off. We don't know what the future of the office holds. Nobody does. Initially, a lot of workers who are working from home were like, oh my gosh, I can do this completely, like no problem. And then, you know, their kids are like crawling all over them and they can't get anything done. They're becoming less healthy because, you know, the refrigerator's right over here and they're not walking a lot. So then the idea of the hybrid work spaces began to emerge. So a lot of companies were thinking, we can downsize our real estate and half of the workers in on one day, half of them in on the other day. We're saving money. However, we don't think really that's gonna last. I think as time goes on, you know, a lot of people want to be back in the office. So we don't really know what that looks like for our office spaces in the future. Of course, the thing is, you know, companies can't necessarily provide office spaces within everyone's home cost-wise for their entire company to be comfortable at home. So what does this look like for the future? We're not really sure. I don't think the office is going anywhere, but it's gonna have a rebirth of a completely different design. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Like this video, please subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Thanks.